introduce David Heayn-Menendez, who is the Executive Director of Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. We're so grateful that he's here for us to talk to us this evening. And he's going to spend a little bit of time talking about what PA IPL is up to and how it can impact us and how we can become involved. So David, thank you so much for being here. We're thrilled.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I mean, I really appreciate the, I always call it robustness of the Main Line chapter. And I think it's indicative of exactly how many faces just popped onto the screen in the last couple of minutes, especially. And I also know that always chapters, those people who are able to make these calls and those people who regularly attend only represent obviously a small portion of the overall number of people that come and go through the Main Line chapter and the various congregations. So we have quite a lot of, I think, very exciting things coming in 2022. And I don't just say that out of some hope to excite you to be involved, but rather we laid a lot of the groundwork for it in 2021, despite all of the changes and growing pains of 2021, transitioning from former staff members to new ones, hiring new people and so forth, new board members, everything else, a pandemic, obviously. The one thing that I will point to is that the Darby Creek Valley Association, I believe is the name fully, and Aurora can correct me, will be also speaking tonight, because I wanted to bring in a specific partner that I'm hoping to not only introduce you all to, but also that I am happy that we are hopefully growing a stronger relationship with specific local tree planting, watershed restoration groups that I hope the Main Line chapter might be able to participate in. So that is one example of what I was hoping to talk about tonight, which is local opportunities for what we call creation care. As of today, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation opened up their list for native plants that they give out every year. This past year, we planted more than double the number of trees that we've planted in the 5 prior years. So just last year, we planted in excess of 10,000 trees, probably something in the realm of 13,000 trees if you count in what we did in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia. That, like I said, is more than double what we did in the prior 5 years, which was approximately 6,000 trees. This year, we're probably on scale to do nearly as many over the 2 planting seasons, the first coming up very soon in the spring when we get the first sort of trees, and then the next in the fall. So if you, your congregations, your friends, your family, literally anybody in Pennsylvania, but especially people further west or near a creek, a riverbed, anything else, there's Greg. He's our main creation care person. I just realized he's on the call. If you're near any watershed, near any creek, have any flooding issues, these are trees, seedlings and bare roots that we are able to get at no cost and that we're able to provide to anybody that wants them. So there's literally no significant restriction on where these can go unless there is a local ordinance. So for example, in Lewisburg, where I'm a council member, I know our shade tree ordinance does not allow the caliber, the thickness of trees that we have available at the present. That doesn't mean that we can't get shade trees in the future, but that they are not street trees. They're lawn trees, they're creek bed, they're all of those types of trees. Greg and I have also created videos that will explain how to plant them. I think also if there's a large enough planting event, I am more than happy to go and join them and to help people along. We also put out a call to other groups. You know, I had something in the realm of 50 Boy Scouts at my last planting in November, and it's a ready, accessible group of people. And as Brenda knows, there's also tons of college students who would probably jump at the opportunity to have such an outdoor, hands-on, direct environmental impact project that they can count towards their service hours and also live the kind of mission of like a campus ministry driven student body that Villanova has. So for all of those things, essentially all we need, or we would ask from you, either individually or congregations, is targets. You tell us you want these trees, you tell us the species, you tell us the number, you tell us this congregation could really use it and this is the person to talk to, we will get you trees. I know that sounds almost too simple, but it really is, at least in the ordering and getting them to you. there is obviously maintenance. And I think somebody asked, maybe it was Courtney, like, what do you do once you put these in? Of course, there is some maintenance, especially the ones that you plant in the spring, because they have to survive the summer. The fall is a little bit easier because you don't have to worry about the heat. But honestly, if you're planting them within a close proximity of where you live or on your congregational land, that's not as big of an issue. Out here in Union County, I was planting them 45 minutes west of me. So I wasn't going to drive 45 minutes every week to go plant them, but I also planted them next to a major creek. So I didn't have any problem with having enough water. I probably had too much water for them, in all honesty. And the species are all native, all non-invasive, and they vary from those that love to be adjacent to running water and those who can maintain themselves not next to a creek bed like that. So that's the first very clear thing. I think Greg can probably speak more to that a little bit later. The next thing is we landed several very large grants. And I say that because it will allow us to do quite a lot of new work and expand our work. And to some of your points in your conversations earlier, it is a lot about climate education. So one of the grants, I can't officially announce it yet, is for watershed education and restoration. So things like flooding, flood mitigation, how do we stop pollutants from getting into the watershed? How do we clean through plantings and other efforts to redirect and help capture things before they ever get into the water system? People like those that are involved in the Darby Creek Valley Association are obviously doing work like that. And our job with this grant is to go to congregations, go to the community, have listening sessions, figure out projects, and then we have 2 more years to execute those projects, to actually implement things on the ground. But it means that we have funding to be able to go do this work in the community and on the ground. Philadelphia is one of our target areas. Philadelphia writ large, obviously. That's one thing. The other, alongside that, is that we have a more civic engagement style education program where we need to go out and talk to people about the Build Back Better program, the bill and its provisions, as well as clean energy plans, and pushing municipalities to adopt clean energy policies and energy consumption sources. So that is something that I've been hoping to get off the ground all year, which is to actually focus some of our attention more clearly on municipalities. So I forget who mentioned their plan earlier, but Radnor Township. Yeah, I'm definitely going to look up the Radnor Township plan, because what I hope to do is go to as many townships in Pennsylvania as possible and actually push them to adopt more of these practices. But one of the ways in which we can do that is for you to tell me clearly that you want to be involved, and I can figure out what township you're in, and then we can go to those meetings together, whether they're over Zoom or in person. We can have a representative from PA IPL. I can try to cajole Courtney and Chuck to attend with you, something like that. But essentially, like, be the voice of reason, be the moral and ethical voice that they need to hear, and come with the data that we need and other parallel townships and how you can implement good work that's already happening. So absolutely, we have the resources to be able to do that on the municipal level. That then expands out to statewide for election stuff. And we have a different grant that is supposed to be encouraging voter registration, voter outreach, get out the vote, which really culminates in the way in which we are supposed to disseminate 10,000 voter guides over the course of the year, as well as get out a great variety of other environmental justice, climate justice information to voters across Pennsylvania. So if your congregation would be open to us providing those voter guides and that information to you, let us know and we'll get them to you. So a lot of these things are basically just you identifying yourself or your congregation as a space where we can introduce ourselves and everything else. Courtney, if you could drop my email in the chat. Sandy was just asking for it.
Will do.
Yeah. Then beyond all of that, we always have our lobbying, our advocacy, and we do sustained advocacy, which means that we're not like save the bees, which is perfectly good. We're not there's a specific moment and a specific thing that has to be pushed for type of people. We're the people that want to have regular calls with our local, state, and federal legislators so that they know us, so that they know we're there, and so that we can leverage that relationship to make sure that we push them in the direction of sustainable, renewable practices that help us and move towards a just transition to a post-fossil fuel future, right? So that means that starting very soon, we will be having our lobby visits again. And then we have our annual bike ride, which this year will be a bike, hike, or walk. So for those of you that don't have bikes or don't want to get on a bike, we can also do it as a walk, and it's groups of people doing this. So you can go out and walk 50 miles over the course of May. And in that time, also do advocacy. Show up at your legislator's office and say, we are 15 churches of your district, and we'd like to have a conversation with you about what you can do to make a cleaner future for everybody. That leads us into a summer of advocacy in which we have weekly advocacy visits, lobby visits with people. And I know lobbying is not for everybody, right? I totally get that that is not necessarily in everybody's home, in everybody's skill set or comfort level, but we have a very easy, straightforward way of doing it. We identify the people, we discuss with those people who want to be involved, who live in the district in advance, what they want to prioritize. And then we bring, obviously, the policy initiatives that PI IPL and our national partner IPL have developed in advance. And again, being able to say that we're not just the people of your district, but we are the voters of Pennsylvania, we are the faith communities of Pennsylvania. Honestly, it scares the hell out of a lot of legislators, both local and state and federal. They understand the power that comes behind speaking from a faith perspective and speaking as a faith community. And I've yet to meet a legislator who underestimates that. Most of them say you actually are the ones that can make change happen. No matter where they are on the political spectrum, they are always very convinced with the power of what groups like PA IPL can do. So then that leads me to the last thing, which is we have a few other grants that we're going to apply for that are on deck that I think that many of you might be interested in getting involved with. Some of them support existing projects like creation care, others advocacy, policy, things like that. And then the one, for example, that is coming up very soon is an AmeriCorps grant that actually utilizes seniors, either as volunteers or even as paid people, to be mentors and to run projects in their own areas. So if you told me that you today could give me 15 people who qualify as seniors to run a program, we could apply for some almost ludicrous amount of money that would support that program. I forget what exactly it was per person that we were able to do, but it's essentially like every senior in the program has an allotment that some of that money goes to the senior and becomes like a stipend, and the other part of the money goes to PIPL to not only administer the grant, but then also to be folded into our general operating money and for the purpose of whatever the project is. So the bottom line of that is, if you have a thing, so like Scott and I forget the Central Baptist, where did you go? You're not on my screen anymore. The two churches in Wayne, if you had a project that you're like, we need to figure this out, we can seek grant funding for it. And I think Chuck and Courtney and I utilized this last year when we brought the performer, whose name escapes me at the moment, to actually do one of these chapter meetings. Or as I said, Doug Talamay event that we're going to do later in Scranton, also we're funding that, at least partially. So all I'm saying is, if there is something that you specifically are trying to do in your congregation, in your community, it's an idea, I really, really do need to hear it and want to hear it. And that brings me to my final point before I turn it over to Aurora and also Greg, which is one of the reasons I wanted all of your congregations in the chat is because I want to compare that list to the people who we have as like official congregations in PA IPL. What that means is a little bit ambiguous, and I readily admit that. But essentially, what we are looking for is congregations to sign on as congregational members, right? So that we can list you, we can say, these are the people that are in our fold who are willing to do this work, that have a green team, who have an individual that convinced the pastor to sign on, right? Because, for example, this past weekend, IPL National said they wanted to release a press release based in Pennsylvania. And they said, give us faith leaders who will be able to be quoted. So I started texting and calling and emailing people that are on that list, that are in our fold, who are connected to us. And now I have half a dozen or more quotes that I can put into a press release. So if I know people are in the fold, it makes it much easier to do the work that we're doing, right? If I know Scott and others are looking for people to help with water runoff and flood mitigation and watershed stuff, then I can know where I can direct that money, and I can know who I need to tap when I'm applying for a grant or developing a project, or even just consulting. Like, Scott, what are your steps 1 through 10 in doing the work that you've already done? And lastly, all of the work that you're doing, if you're congregations of PIPL, we can then advertise that to encourage other people to do it, right? It's leading by example. That if they see Wayne Presbyterian did this and Central Baptist did that and the Unitarians did this, it just encourages more and more congregations across the state to pick up that same mission, because now they see that people like them, of their denomination or not, are doing that work. And to go back to Sandy's point, this past year, IPL National had a film screening, and the window for the film screening didn't work for this congregation, but a Unitarian congregation near me said, we really, really want to screen that film. So I contacted IPL, I contacted the producer, and I said, could I have this for a congregational screening? They said, absolutely yes. So now I got a free screening for a congregation in central Pennsylvania. I invited everybody in the state, and I think something like 150 people saw a film that they couldn't have seen otherwise, right? And all we asked was for donations, that if people had the money or wanted to give a little bit of money, that would be great for us. So PIPL benefited a little bit. Everybody got the film. They did a in-person and Zoom-based workshop at that congregation, but it started with just one request of, how about that film for us, right? So I think that's my appeal to all of you is, I want always the chapter work that Courtney, Chuck, and all of you do to be driven by you. We're doing our stuff, and I would love for you to be on board. Like, all of these grants that I'm talking about that we already have, please join me. But like, really, there's something you want to do, please do it. So just to give you an example of that, maybe Courtney, if you want to highlight Aurora so that she can tell you a little bit more. And I think she also brought on somebody else, Aurora, if you want to identify the person's name. And then that way they can tell us about the Darby Creek work that they're doing and the plan for 2022. And then we can maybe switch over to Greg if he wants to say anything about creation care for PIPL specifically.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me, David. My name is Aurora Dizel. I'm representing the Darby Creek Valley Association. And there are actually several board members from DCVA here, which I'm happy to see. So hopefully if you have questions specifically about DCVA, they can also chime in with their area of expertise. But specifically, Steve Lockard and Peter Puglianese are also here to talk about our rain garden program. So I got hooked up with David through actually Pam Costi, who is at the Main Line Unitarian Church, and she's been a member of DCVA for a long time, and she was involved in one of our projects this past year has been a partnership that we are part of a grant with Audubon, and they were working in the Whitby Meadows area. We did some tree planting, some trash cleanups, and she really got a great crew of people. In fact, I think I recognized a few people on this call from Mainline Unitarian that joined us to help at those cleanups and tree planting. So we were so grateful to have their support, because they were, bringing a group of people. It just that were, already knew each other and friendly. It just made the whole atmosphere of the event really fun, and happy to have their support. And we'll also be doing tree plantings and cleanups with that same grant going forward. That's in the Cobbs Creek area of Philadelphia. How many people here, let me see if I can change my view so I can see people better. Are many of you already familiar with DCVA, or have you heard of the Darby Creek Valley Association? So I don't know, like, if there's anybody here who's not heard of us, but we are a watershed association covering the Darby Creek watershed, which includes Cobbs Creek. It's our largest tributary. We're primarily in Delaware County, but there are pieces of Chester County, Montgomery, and Philadelphia County that make up our watershed as well. So some ways that you can get involved in DCVA. I just mentioned our, tree plantings and cleanups that happen throughout the year, but we have our main event, our biggest event of the year is our annual watershed-wide cleanup every spring. And that's for this year is going to be spread out through the month of April, because in the past 38 years, it has grown so large and more sites keep getting added. Last year, we had like 52 different cleanup sites. And historically, we've done them all on one single day. But we just felt like this year we could better handle things logistically if we moved them. So we are having cleanups throughout the month of April, every Saturday. And to get those cleanups done and pick up thousands of pounds of trash, we need volunteers. So anyone who's interested in helping us get out in April and pick up, we would love to have you. And that if you just go to dcva.org, we have a watershed cleanup page, and you can go and look at each weekend, every Saturday in April. And I've only just started scheduling the cleanup, so more to come. And if you know of a cleanup site within the watershed and you want to be a captain, please reach out to me. Again, we always need volunteers and help. Another way you can get involved in DCA, before I switch over to rain gardens and hand it off to Peter and Stephen, citizen science water monitoring. We partnered with the Willistown Conservation Trust and started a Darby Creek Headwaters monitoring program. So Willistown has kind of set up the Headwaters monitoring, and but we're going to extend that down throughout, the central and lower watersheds as well. And we've just gotten this off the ground. It was really delayed with the pandemic, unfortunately, but we're really getting going now. And that involves getting trained by Lauren at Willistown. And you would take monthly samples of a waterway near you. And it's really quite simple. You don't have to have a science background. Anybody can do it. We would make sure you have all the supplies and all the knowledge you need. And it's just once a month visiting that waterway, taking a visual assessment, checking out some basic water quality things, and you're contributing to understanding the health of the waterway and what pollutants are affecting it and how that differs from the headwaters and down, and how that changes. So and actually, if you want to hear more about that program next week, again, if you go to dcva.org, you'll see that next week, I believe it's Thursday. Unfortunately, I will be away, but Lauren is giving a talk about the program itself and how it's been going so far and how you can get involved. So please sign up for that Zoom if you're interested in hearing more about that. And so another thing I wanted to highlight was our rain garden programs. That's another big part of what we do. And it started with have a rain garden in Haverford Township and has expanded to Upper Darby. And we actually just, we got a grant to continue expanding that to more townships and reaching out to other local townships that want to get a rain garden program started. So hopefully Peter can chime in if you're on. And
hi, everybody.
And Stephen, whoever wants to go first. I just thought Peter, because you were the original rain garden program. So, and then we'll move to Steve.
Okay. Hopefully everybody's hearing me. I don't have visual. Sorry about that. Old-fashioned kind of guy, don't have a camera. So as Aurora said, we've been doing rain gardens in Haverford probably, well, last year was our 7th year. And so we are, I wear both the hat of a DCVA board member and help run the Have a Rain Garden program, which sprung out of the Environmental Advisory Committee in the township. And we partnering, I heard a lot about partnering. We love partnering. DCVA loves partnering. The Haverford EAC loves partnering. Pennsylvania Resources Council is another partner. The Eastern Delaware County Stormwater Collaborative is a partner. And so we sort of hold hands. Different pieces and parts of us get grants and contributions, and we've managed to keep this sort of all volunteer program in Haverford going for 7 years and counting. And so how, we've actually had a lot of participation from faith groups. We just built a couple of rain gardens outside of the old Haverford Friends on Eagle Road in Havertown. We have had, I think it was Temple Lutheran environmental group came out and helped us plant rain gardens in one of the public parks in Haverford. We've got, it's been sort of an amazing response, and they seem to be getting more popular. And we've got a pool of volunteers that's really now, I think, between 400 and 500 volunteers. But some of the volunteers, like myself, who've been at it for 7 years, we always need more help. And so anyone who is interested in it in particular, and there's, we encourage people to do things on multiple levels. You can adopt a build. We'd love to do more rain gardens at churches and synagogues. If the congregation is interested in it, we'd love to come out and assess and see if we can do something. You can adopt a build, whether it's in a public park or we had a group of, this past fall, we had a group of high school environmental club at the high school come out and adopt a build. So any and all of those things, we'd love to have participation. You can reach Have a Rain Garden at gmail.com. And ask to get on our volunteer list. If you live in Haverford, we'll assess you for a rain garden. Oh, I talked about multiple levels. So one of the things that we've tried to do in our sort of disorganized way is welcome apprentices. Okay, so we've, we have had, we've been very, very fortunate to have some very active people from other townships, like Steve Lockhart, who's on the call, from Upper Darby, who spent, Steve, I don't know, a couple of years at least working side by side with us. And now, Steve is helping to spearhead a similar program in Upper Darby. I know we've had some participation from Newtown Township. There is, I think, a nascent DCVA assisted group springing up in Tredyffrin, Aurora. Is that correct? I think so. So, apprenticing, we can advise on how to get a program started in your municipality. It's not easy, I have to say, as you all know from, it takes people like you all to, who really want to roll up their sleeves and get things done. And it's amazing what you can accomplish. So where people 7, 8 years ago had no clue what a rain garden is, now maybe 10 or 20% do, and love it. And I think, the idea is just let's build it and build it and build it, and they'll be visible and people will see it, they'll understand it. And, if we can get 10, 20, 30% of people in, to do things on their properties, we'll be making a really significant difference in all of the things that David was talking about before, like water quality, flooding, etc. So anyway, I'll be quiet. I tend to talk too much.
So I know this is the Main Line chapter itself, but I've also pitched to Courtney and Chuck in the past about if people are willing, we also obviously have the Philadelphia chapter and we have projects in Philadelphia. So, I mean, one of the things is air quality monitoring that kind of goes along with Aurora, that we wanted to put air quality monitors on congregations. Another one is planting trees at public schools like the Juniata Park Academy, which is in the heart of North Philly and is a massive heat sink, or along a tree corridor in a different part of North Philly that literally you couldn't find a tree if you went down certain neighborhoods in Philadelphia. The one in South Philly, Point Breeze, is actually an equally terrible heat sink because of the narrowness of the sidewalks. So there's just nothing to capture the water runoff, nothing to capture the heat, nothing. And as I said, like either to be there to plant or to help with the logistics of getting it set up or helping getting volunteers to these places is always helpful across the board, let alone the fact that the air monitoring is literally just like reaching out to another Baptist church in Philadelphia and saying, hey, I belong to PA IPL. They have this thing with air monitors. Could we talk about getting one on your congregation? And I think that there is something really strong about that connection of going from one congregation with the same denomination to another congregation of the same denomination and saying, like, we are of the same faith. Let's talk about how we can do this, to be those agents of change out in the community more broadly. And I think that obviously when we're talking about frontline communities, especially in places like North Philly and elsewhere, there is a greater sensitivity that needs to be brought to it for racial and ethnic and even linguistic barriers that exist. But I think that that's part of the essential work that PIPL is involved with, that we are doing everything that we can to navigate that space and to fully lean into our mission in that way. So I think that everything that the Darby Creek is doing is fantastic, and I encourage you all to be involved in that and to, you know, do the raised beds, do the flower beds, do the rain gardens, all of these things. But we can also do those same things in Philadelphia if we have the manpower, and in other neighborhoods like in Chester, where we're trying to partner with Chester East Side to do similar work as well. So these are all opportunities that exist. We just need to know that you guys are on board or interested or even willing to rally other people. And to that end, I just dropped in the chat, we put this survey out a few months ago, and I think for Philadelphia and Main Line, for which we have thousands of potential emails, we have 11 responses. So if you would like to give us your feedback on what you would like to have PIPL do in 2022, if you have not already filled it out, then I would absolutely appreciate any advice, any feedback, any thoughts that you could provide in that survey, or even emailing me, honestly. The one other last thing I'll add that I didn't mention earlier is that we are redoing our entire website. And as part of that, we are also looking for content creators in terms of letters to the editor and op-eds that we always seek from people, but also just like regular writing content. So Arthur Waskow, who lives in Philadelphia, is a prolific writer, constantly writing, constantly sending me things. And there are other people like that. And I'm sure some of you have amazing talents as writers. This could be anything from a poem to a policy statement to just like sounding off about the essential needs to make change in climate justice in the world, you know, or like if Aurora wanted to write something about Darby Creek and the importance of doing this and spreading this, as you just elaborated, not only in one municipality, but every municipality around, I think we would welcome that. Excuse me. I took a COVID test earlier, so I'm like still affected by the swabbing. It's my first COVID test in 2 years. I've never taken a COVID test till today. So it was a unique and novel experience for me. I don't know if Greg or Courtney or who else wants to chime in.
So I was just going to say, we've heard a lot of information. Who has questions? For David or for Aurora or for Peter? Okay, so I have a question about the rain gardens. Do they have to go into areas where there is a natural accumulation of rainwater? Is that a dumb question?
No, not at all. So what we're actually looking to do is follow the flow. And so we're trying to really mitigate the flow from roofs, any other impervious surfaces like driveways. And we've been a little more creative than the average rain garden program or chasing water. So we've actually found driveways that flow to the edge of the driveway, and we put in rain gardens on both edges of a driveway or one edge of a driveway. Sometimes you're piping water from roof drains. What we actually have a rating system, and there's some properties that are naturally handling their own stormwater runoff. And you look at that and some people say, oh, well, should we do it where the water pools in my backyard? And I usually say, well, if it's not hurting anyone or anything, leave it alone. That's what we're trying to do, is keep the stormwater on the property. If it doesn't, sit there for 3 days after a rain, leave it alone. But what we're really focused on doing is taking the rapid gush, the runoff that's going directly into the storm sewers, right? And seeing if we could divert that into a more, into a natural little in-ground containment, catch the flow, water the plants. And so that's really the objective. So it's a natural thing that people point us to their wet backyard spot. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes, usually it doesn't. Usually it's not the best place. Likewise, people are also asking, hey, my neighborhood floods, or this neighborhood floods, shouldn't you put a rain garden there? And our response is, well, it's usually too late. What we want to do is walk all the way up that watershed to where all the water is coming from. That's putting that neighborhood underwater. So that's, a little bit more about rain gardens. By the way, in March, for anyone who's really passionate about it, there is a virtual rain garden workshop. It's a little intense. It's 3 hours long, but we've been doing that for many, many years, and it's a great workshop.
Is that online?
It is. I think we actually have one of them on video, I believe.
We have a recording of a past one, but this one is also Zoom, or GoToWebinar. It's online.
GoToWebinar, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I can share it out more broadly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I put a link for the events for DCVA. Like I said, you can find that rain garden workshop there. You can find the citizen science workshop. You can find a link to the cleanups. It's all there. But if you can't find what you're looking for, please email me. I'm happy to help.
Great, thanks.
And I just wanted to add real quick, something I wanted to add on to something Peter said about, neighborhood has flooding. Can we put in a rain garden? And he said it's too late. It's really also, I think our people who live in the upper part of a watershed may not realize it, but when they see on the news, say, for instance, the Eastwick community and their terrible flooding, that's all the water coming from the upper watershed, right? Like there's only so much you can do in that community. You really have to do the work in the municipalities in the upper watershed to prevent that from happening. So you're helping your neighbor, and it's an environmental justice issue in that sense too.
So then, Aurora and Peter, is this something that you do for congregations, or do you do it for homeowners as well?
Well, the Have a Rain Garden program is really oriented toward homeowners, but we have approached congregations, and congregations have approached us where we thought there was an opportunity. In Havertown, some of the churches are a little sort of urban landlocked, so to speak. And so they're not necessarily easy do's, but we've worked with the township, and we've put them in parks, sort of partnering with them, where they did the heavy digging and we did the planting with volunteers. And so the answer is anywhere that wants a rain garden where it makes sense, we'll try to make it happen.
Thank you.
I wonder if to that end, like you said, for the landlocked ones, if you can't get the congregation, do all of the private property around it if the congregation is having the flooding issue, do every private property that you can is in the entire town, and then you don't have so much of a problem at the congregation.
It's funny you should mention that. We have a some might say overly ambitious project that DCVA got a Growing Greener grant for, to put in 50 rain gardens within a small area so that we could actually measure. And by a small area, I mean an area that only has about maybe 95 to 120 homes. So the ambitious part is it's much easier to find 3 or 4 or 5% of very, very committed people who are willing to really go all out and do that kind of thing at their home. As you know, it's difficult to get to that 10% to 20%, 50% is really, really ambitious. I mean, I love Interfaith Power and Light because I know you guys do a lot of stuff on solar, and we're doing stuff on solar as well. And but it's difficult to, it's difficult to get to people to move in great numbers. It's something we're all trying to do, and we have to do it. But it's,
Peter, thanks. I think Scott had something he wanted to say, maybe along the rain garden lines.
Yeah, well, Peter mentioned earlier about Tredyffrin. They also got a Growing Greener grant. They did some pilot projects on parks and public properties, and I think that was the basis for the grant. The grant is now asking residents, individual residents who would like to have a rain garden installed on their property, that the Environmental Advisory Committee has a team that's going to help them do that. So there's a lot less landlocked property in Tredyffrin, so maybe there'll be more interest in some of that. So the other thing is, I had a question for David that's more on the advocacy line. Just briefly, what's the status of RGGI?
Yeah, so Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So the House and Senate both voted their disapproval resolutions, which don't really mean much of anything because they didn't have a veto-proof majority. So the governor then issued his veto, thus providing for the direction of the government agencies to move forward with Rggi as it had been already previously approved by those policy government offices, because he didn't go a legislative route. It was never going to pass the legislature. He doesn't need it to pass the legislature, but now the legislature is trying to do one of two things. Either they will have a legal challenge again to the whole process. He is also, Governor Wolf, is countersuing for an earlier breach of policy and procedure that occurred during the earlier stages of Rggi at the end of 2021. And then also they are trying to pass legislation that would remove from government agencies the ability to regulate climate, which was written into the PA Constitution back in the 70s. But that was one of their main claims in the earlier stages of the Rggi approval, was that the government agencies didn't have the ability to regulate carbon, except it is absolutely and explicitly written into it and already upheld by the PA Supreme Court. So it's essentially an ongoing legal battle, but as of right this second, it does seem like Rggi will be moving forward, but not likely for Q2, but more likely for Q3. Unless there is something else that could happen, but like they didn't have the votes to stop it. But this is also why the election matters, because Pennsylvania's legislature is often one of the last to ever do anything worthwhile. And also you have people like Darryl Metcalfe in particular who believe in everything that could possibly poison you, including road spreading, which I don't know if any of you know what that means, but it's essentially taking fracking waste, which is often toxic and sometimes radioactive, and literally spraying it on the roads so as to distribute it without having the companies have to pay for it. So instead of reasonably, sustainably, and safely disposing of waste that probably shouldn't even be occurring in the first place if we didn't have fracking and cracking, they did the cracking and fracking, poisoned watersheds, and then they decided to poison it everywhere else. Which before the only allowance was for non-paved roads, and Darryl Metcalfe and others sponsored a bill that would allow it to be on paved roads. So literally, basically everywhere in Pennsylvania could have toxic materials spread by companies that are abusing our natural resources in the first place. I don't know who was first, Darryl, Chuck, or Brenda.
So I think Brenda had her hand up.
to follow up on the Rggi, I contact John Kane and others to advocate, and it really is not that difficult. And then you do get on their kind of to-do list. And so I was invited to a hearing that's coming up on the 28th. And that's what I was trying to look at while I was listening. So on the 28th at 10 o'clock, Senator Kane and Moose will be holding a hearing on the proposed Anthracite Ridge Wind Farm project in Schuylkill County. And so I got a personal invitation to attend that hearing that I never would have had if I hadn't been writing and calling them and hanging out with, other environmentalists. and nothing bad has happened because I shot my mouth off, and visited them in Harrisburg, which is all fairly new to me 5 years ago, but it's very important. And I think the other thing that's in our backyard here in the Main Line is all the issues regarding the Mariner East pipeline. And so we have some things going on in our own community. They're extremely dangerous, and people just, got themselves arrested the other day trying to stop the last leg of that going through. So that pipeline, what's going through that pipeline is the intent is to create plastics. So the person that was going to have the plastics conversation with their church might want to know a little bit about what's going on with Mariner East and why you could blow up on the way to the Exton Library, as well as have more plastics because that's in our backyard.
So just to tell people what the Anthracite Ridge Wind Farm is that the Pennsylvania National Guard overstepped their ability to prevent development in relation to their military base in Schuylkill County, and therefore tried to put the kibosh on the development of a wind farm in Schuylkill County. That is not legally allowed by the federal government, and we signed on to a letter that was written to the governor to basically inform him as well as to move forward with the process of the development of the wind farm, because there is a official federal process by which military personnel are allowed to oppose the development of certain things, and that is not what the PA National Guard did. And Governor Wolf is technically the commander-in-chief of the PA National Guard, and therefore has a direct responsibility and capacity to mitigate that conflict in the first place.
Thanks, David. Chuck?
Back on rain gardens for a moment. My question is what the grants are now requiring, or what the municipalities are requiring for the life of a rain garden when it's installed, particularly when it's funded under a grant like Growing Greener.
Yeah, so the Growing Greener program has a grant agreement that the homeowner has to sign, and I believe it's 20 years that they cannot dismantle, destroy the rain garden. I was going to make a joke and say, how long will it last? I mean, rain gardens will stay there forever. I love them. We've actually tried things like planters, that absorb, but it's actually, I think rain gardens are a more elegant solution, but 20 years is sort of the answer to that question. I think we actually have our own Have a Rain Garden agreement. And one of the homeowner objections that you often get is, well, is this going to constrain me from selling my property? So we actually put, where we're not doing a Growing Greener and we just have our agreement, we'll basically give them an opt-out. So they're getting, under our program, they're getting a free rain garden with sweat equity on their part. And the provision says, well, if you don't want to pass the agreement on to the buyer, or if you just want to give up on the rain garden, contribute $500 to the program. And that basically pays for the materials that go into a typical rain garden, sort of the average price of the materials.
Thank you. That's the most thorough answer I've gotten on that question. It's become thorny, and I know in a couple of places.
Yeah, which we don't like it to be an obstacle, but I guess one of the things we've learned over 7 years is enthusiasm of the homeowner is a great screening criterion. Rather than hesitancy being sort of the first maybe red flag that comes up.
Yeah,
Brent,
thank you.
thank you very much. Brenda?
You know, works with Habitat for Humanity, and I was out on a project, and, you know, is there a way to maybe pair some of these free trees or the rain gardens with a habitat effort?
Yeah, so we gave Aurora, what, 55 trees in the fall? Something along that realm. And also she's currently working with Greg to get more.
Yeah, super grateful for that. That's actually how Pam first, referred me to you and to PA IPL, was about getting trees. And we're looking forward to actually using them in our rain garden programs, and also just municipalities in the watershed if they need them in their parks or whatever. But primarily we're looking at rain gardens for these particular species. Yeah. I'm not connected with Habitat for Humanity at this point, but that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, it just seems, we send volunteers to go and do whatever, whether it's sheetrock or cleanup or painting or whatever. But when I was there, I could see that the landscaping was really in need. And I realize it's not Main Line. We're doing this in Coatesville, but they have an unusual situation there where they're creating, I think, something like 40, 50 homes all together. They're creating a community.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if they have like a stormwater, if anyone's
right
thought into that in their planning. Yeah, that's a good question.
Can I jump in a moment on that? Not only the trees that we plant, the mature trees also do a lot of mitigation of rainwater. It slows down the rainwater getting down to the ground, gives it more time to get absorbed. And so thinking about putting mature trees in, and this program that I'm kind of doing the distributing for is through the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And they have made a commitment to put 10 million trees in Pennsylvania by 2025. And they're at about 5 million at the moment. And their distribution for this fall, for this spring, is 260,000 trees. And just in the last 4 weeks, I've been ordering for a variety of people who know they want them and have a place for them. And I've ordered about 5,000 trees with free tubes and free stakes. There's about 90 different species. They go from bare roots to seedlings, and from anywhere from maybe a foot tall to 3 or 4 feet tall, depending on the growers. And I have actually still probably about 700 or 800 trees that are kind of leftovers from what I've ordered that are available for this spring. For instance, we've got kind of a Pony Express system where I deliver trees to David. David has to go to Philadelphia with some regularity, and he's delivering them in there. So that's all a possibility for this spring. And also next fall, there'll be even more trees put out, or I think it's actually another 240,000 trees in the fall. And there's about 3 years still left in this program. The other thing I'd like to promote as an idea for congregations, and it's something that we do here in this area, is there's a fair number of we do most of our we distribute trees to private landowners, to people who have woodlots, to people who are kind of into kind of making their own garden native, the stuff that came from Doug Tallamy. But we also do a lot of planting on public lands. On February 2nd, we're going to have a Central PA webinar on partnering with Rails to Trails. There's a large Rails to Trails system here, and I think there's a large Rails to Trails or civic trails in your area too, where there's public land or semi-public land that can take trees. And the advantage to planting trees, not only in slowing down water flow, but also it's the #1 technology for carbon sequestration. And that that we plant a tree now and it's going to be working for 50, 100 years, soaking up carbon. And that's the best way to control global warming. So keep that in mind. We have more trees now. We'll have more trees in the future. I'm learning how to be a distributor, and we're learning how to create a distribution highway, so to speak. So keep us in mind.
Thanks.
I dropped the Google form link in the chat as well if you want to request trees specifically from us.
For the trees, thanks. Anybody else? One last question? Chuck, were you raising your hand or?
No.
Dan?
No.
Dan?
Yeah, I would just Pennsylvania Senate Bill 275, I just learned about it. It's basically a bill that has been filed in Harrisburg, whereby any attempt to restrict the access of a municipality to any utility or type of utility would be preempted by laws. So a zoning that requires all electric buildings would be not permitted by this law. Anyone know if this bill is advancing at Harrisburg?
It's still being debated right this second. It's one of the major things that all of the environmental groups are opposing, but I don't think that it's necessarily been brought to the floor completely yet. But I didn't make the last briefing this past Friday, but I can get back to you, Daniel, if you'd like, about it.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll hear from Patricia and then we'll close. Patricia, there you go.
Sorry, I had to miss the first part of the meeting. I see it was recorded or is being recorded. Is it possible you can send me a copy of that so I can see the whole meeting?
So I'll send you a link to where these videos are housed, and it will be up in a week or so.
Okay, I wanted to ask too. You mentioned earlier in the meeting about funding available to churches and meetings for various projects. Does that include solar panels?
So that gets a little bit more complicated, only partly because of the price tag of it. We can help you with the process and help you navigate that, and even try to find some potential funding for it. But usually the price tag for solar panels for a congregation would be more than what we could directly distribute to any specific congregation. But again, I think that we could facilitate that in a lot of ways, but not necessarily like hand you a grant to pay for that.
Can I suggest
Thank
that
you.
can I suggest that you consider perhaps discussing this topic in another session? I know Joy Baxter, who has joined, who has been on this, is with the Clean Energy Co-op. I'm actually, one of my other hats is with Solarized Delco, and there are solutions for congregations for solar that actually take advantage of or sort of mitigate the disadvantage that congregations are in because they're not taxpayers, right?
Yeah, and we have as Courtney said, the YouTube channel has our previous like 2 or 3 different webinars, a statewide meeting, I think a mainline meeting, and then one other that have all addressed solar installations and things like that, financing. But I mean, I think that's obviously an ongoing major topic of interest. So I'm sure that in 2022, we'll have another. Last year we did Solar September. So I imagine that probably we'll do a Solar September again and focus on it heavily in the month of September.
So there's actually a little bit of practical experience. So there was a 44 kilowatt installation on Temple Lutheran in Havertown. And I know Joy's congregation is working on a solar installation. So it's, there's certainly people who are willing to share those experiences if there's a congregation interested.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you all. David, Aurora, Peter, thank you for your expertise. Thank you, everybody, for your good questions. I would actually like to close us with a prayer. So if you'll pray with me. Creator God of all the universe, we thank you for your many good gifts, for the beauty of creation and its rich and varied fruits, for clean water and fresh air, for food and shelter, animals and plants. Forgive us for the times we have taken the earth's resources for granted and wasted what you have given us. Transform our hearts and minds so that we would learn to care and share, to touch the earth with gentleness and with love, respecting all living things. We pray for those who suffer as a result of our waste, greed, and indifference. And we pray that the day would come when everyone has enough food and clean water. Help us to respect the rights of all people and all species, and help us to willingly share your gifts today and always. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. I am saving the chat. I am sharing native plant information, and reach out if you have any ideas for programs. As you already have, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Folks, on Wednesday, there will be a World Day of Prayer focused on hoping that Ukraine and Russia will not come to blows. This is a call from Pope Francis to the whole world of the faithful to marshal their prayers, as it says in the letter of James, that the prayers of the righteous are powerful and effective. So please keep that in mind.
Amen.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody. Blessings on you.